Welcome to this video from Wortell Enterprise Security. Today we'll be looking at the cybersecurity breach that happened to the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. We'll be looking at the timeline of events and we'll also having a look at how Microsoft security solutions possibly could have detected some steps or all of the attack. So let's get going. My name is MITRE. I lead the Enterprise Security Division at Wortell. I'm also a Microsoft MVP and a Regional Director, and I've been focusing on Microsoft security for the past couple of years. Now let's look at what happened near Christmas Eve last year, 2019. The University of Maastricht announced that they had become a victim of a major cybersecurity breach. And major news outlets like the Dutch NOS reported on this, telling that the university had been hit hard and that all systems are down. And the spokesman, Gert van Doorn, was telling how the malware attack impacted every Windows server and that it was now encrypted and held ransom.
Goedenavond. Niet echt fijne feestdagen voor de Universiteit Maastricht. Vlak voor de kerst werd de universiteit gehackt. Het complete computernetwerk kwam stil te liggen. En nu, 3 dagen later, blijkt hoe ernstig de situatie is. Er is nog altijd geen mailverkeer. Studenten kunnen niet bij essentiële gegevens voor hun studie. En de universiteitsbibliotheek is offline. Allemaal het gevolg van gijzelsoftware.
So let's fast forward a bit. 6 weeks after, when the University of Maastricht held a second press conference together with Fox IT and told about the details of the ransomware attack. The February debrief on February 6th was public, together with a representative of Fox IT, and the university disclosed that hackers had been in the network for months before the malware was executed. And hackers had all the time to prepare a targeted attack and cripple the university. However, the most interesting part of the press conference was the fact that they paid for the ransom. About 200,000 euros or 30 bitcoins were paid to the attackers for the university to get the decryption key and get systems back up and online. Now let's rewind, have a look at the timeline and see what events were happening and how Microsoft security solutions could have helped based on the report that was made public by Fox IT. The first tip that happened was spear phishing. Initial access was gained by sending 2 spear phishing emails, and these emails were opened on October 15 and 16, 2009 on 2 separate workstations. Now that's an interesting fact because at this point in time, still 60% of all successful attacks originate from a spear phishing attack. So it's something that organizations still have to worry about and put protections for in place. More than 60%, so that's not a technical problem per se, but also user education problem. How can we make sure that they understand that it's a phishing email coming from outside, posing as somebody else, so they don't click it? Well, that also begins with what's available on the internet, because maybe your company is publishing who the CFO is. Maybe on your website we can find how the email structure is built, like first name dot last name at yourdomain.com. Maybe other info we can find so that we can do the spear phishing and build templates of emails that look like they are the original and real thing. Now, one of the suggestions here is to have a look at Office Advanced Threat Protection, because this can help and prevent some of this spear phishing. It uses a combination of machine learning, sandbox detonation and other techniques. Now, sandbox detonation is very interesting because what it does, it takes an attachment, brings it to a safe environment in the cloud, detonates it there to see which connections are happening, maybe what files get executed, what registry keys it tries to access, before it's flagged as a real and successful file or maybe a malicious file. But also the machine learning, where we look at bigger patterns like all of the users and companies in Office 365 and understand if this IP address or this sender is malicious. Another thing to look at is the attack surface reduction rules. Those are built into Windows 10 and they can help prevent execution of the malicious payload, because how logical is it that Outlook can create a child process, create some script, run it, execute it on behalf of the user, all from a macro, let's say in Word or Excel. Well, a lot of organizations don't need that. There's no business justification for it. So let's disable it altogether so that they can just not be created and that malware can't be executed. There's a couple of categories like blocking all Office applications from creating child processes, block execution of scripts, etc., etc. So once these attackers had information and got into the initial two workstations, they could disable services, install software, and start the reconnaissance. And this was all made possible due to the fact that regular users at the university were local admin on those workstations. They could do anything they want, deinstall software, install software, and that's the way the hackers could then move forward to their next phase of attack. Looking at the initial access and at the report, we saw in October 24 of 2019 that the attackers wanted to start the reconnaissance of the network using PowerView. And we'll have a look at PowerView next. However, Windows Defender antivirus recognized it and even blocked the execution of the script before it could be executed. However, because the hackers were local admin, they could in fact disable Windows Defender antivirus and then still execute PowerView and start their reconnaissance. Now, if you don't know what PowerView is, it's publicly available on GitHub on /PowerShell Mafia. It's a pure post-exploitation agent built on secure communications. It has a flexible architecture with modules like keyloggers, like Mimikatz, and we'll talk about Mimikatz next. It has methods to evade network detection, all wrapped up in a really easy to use framework. And these kinds of things are publicly available to everybody. So these are the things they loaded onto the workstation to start the reconnaissance and get a better understanding of what was on the network and how to attack those for common vulnerabilities. Now, one of the things you could have considered with the Microsoft security solutions is rolling out something we call tamper protection. Enable anti-tampering so that Windows Defender antivirus cannot be disabled. It's something that Intune can do for you, and it makes life a lot easier, because even if you're local admin, you can't disable Windows Defender and you still get blockage of things that shouldn't happen on that workstation. Now, another pro tip is to have a look at Microsoft Defender ATP. It has a big section of what is called threat analytics, and it gives you information of common attack groups, of common attack vectors, specific usage of certain tools, and they have dashboards of whether or not this is happening in your environment and whether or not you should follow up on those workstations as well. Here's a screenshot for PowerShell Empire, part of PowerView, where you see the MITRE TTP numbers. We'll talk about MITRE later. We see the various threat techniques or components. We see the protections that Microsoft give you in the form of EDR or antivirus or even on network level, so that you get a better understanding of this attack vector. Next up was the reconnaissance. They had initial access, they had the software installed they needed, and they were using PowerSploit or PowerView to scan the network and find vulnerabilities. They found access to some of these networks and some of these servers, and then they used Mimikatz as well as Cobalt Strike as part of their next phase of the attack. Now, the reconnaissance is something that is very easy to detect. Often attackers target Active Directory to get more detailed information about who has access to domain admins, who is part of a certain local group, what are the sessions on a certain server, and you see common PowerShell queries they can use, or like we just saw, the PowerView framework they could use. Now, Microsoft has a product called Azure Advanced Threat Protection. It's a cloud service that protects your Active Directory. It looks at the sessions that's being held on those servers. It looks at network traffic. It looks at patterns to understand whether or not a user is doing something they shouldn't. And here's a sample screenshot where we identify malicious replication, reconnaissance using SMB, session enumeration, but also reconnaissance using DNS. And this can then be used together with the other information to paint a bigger picture of what was happening. We just talked about Mimikatz and we just talked about Cobalt Strike, and let's have a look on what they are. Now, Mimikatz as well is a freely available tool on the internet that everybody can use, and it looks at, for instance, memory and other parts of your system to understand if there's any hashes that represent a password are available in memory. It can then capture them and you could use them, for instance, to authenticate to another service and steal those hashes altogether. But there's also Cobalt Strike, and Cobalt Strike is a hacking framework which those attackers used and is commonly used to achieve persistence by deploying beacons. And these beacons interact with those attackers through a command and control channel. It's very flexible, and again, they can plug in modules, run a lot of assemblies and information to get more access to your network. Now, if you look at the Microsoft security world, then both Cobalt Strike and Mimikatz were detected, but they were not blocked because MC was set to observe mode. And MC is a script intervention method. We can have a look at what's running, then detect whether or not it's malicious and perhaps block it. But because it was not set in block mode, but set in observe mode, then it wasn't detected. It was detected, but in fact not blocked. Second was Cobalt Strike, their command and control framework to achieve persistence and move further into the network. Now, a lot of these common methods that Cobalt Strike deploys can be detected by Microsoft Defender ATP, by the EDR functionality. It sees process injection, it sees an uncommon file was created and such, and starts to understand that Cobalt Strike is active in your network and then could block it or at least give you an alert on that it's happening and what to do next. So these attackers are in the network, they've achieved persistence, they're looking at the network to understand what's more. Now they're moving laterally from server to server to start preparing for their full attack. So the lateral movement part. What we saw at the University of Maastricht was that they used the pass the hash technique to move laterally through the network. They found domain admin credentials on a server in memory using Mimikatz and then moved from server to server. These password hashes were there because administrators actually RDP'd to those servers. That meant they would take over the screen, log into the server with their domain admin credentials, do their admin work, patch something, maybe check a backup or something, logged out again, or maybe left the session behind. And then anybody logging into that server would be able to grab those hashes through Mimikatz and start abusing them for further lateral movement. Now, the attackers use the administrator account, domain admin, to prepare and distribute their ransomware using their own deployment tool called sage.exe. This was actually stopped by one server which ran McAfee. But guess what? Because they were both local admin and now domain admin on the network, they could fully stop McAfee, they could uninstall McAfee and carry forward with the preparations of their attack. Now, these pass the hash attacks and lateral movement, as well as persistent techniques like DC Shadow, for instance, can be detected again by Azure ATP. We find these over the pass, the hash attacks, we find remote code fusion attempts, and then can actually warn you of things happening before things escalate. And so these attackers got more access and were moving laterally through the network. So by now they had access to the network, they achieved persistent, they had domain admin, they actually rolled out the staging parts of their ransomware, they're fully ready to engage. and then it became December 23 in the night, 6:26 p.m., and the attackers start rolling out their ransomware. First, they deleted the backups, and they were online backups, so they could access them on the network. And then they started the encryptions, which meant that more than 200 systems, Windows systems, started displaying this message: your files are now encrypted, and you need to call in help or pay us money to get this solved. Okay, January 2020, university already down for weeks.
We hebben zelf al onze systemen nu offline gehaald om op die manier goed te kunnen werken aan een oplossing. En er zeker van te zijn dat onze data nu ook echt veilig zijn voor verdere aanvallen van buitenaf.
Hackers hebben de besturing overgenomen van de websites en maken die ontoegankelijk voor de buitenwereld. Bijzonder is dat de universiteit contact heeft met de hackers.
Er is een contact geweest, ja, maar daar mag ik niks over zeggen als het gaat over de aard van dat contact of de inhoud van dat contact. Want we zitten natuurlijk nu met een opsporing, we zitten zo met ons eigen onderzoek. We hebben gisteren ook aangifte gedaan bij de politie.
So the question is now, how did they solve it? How did they finally get back into the systems now that this ransomware was active? And again, learning from 6 weeks later, we found the answer. The answer was that 3 days after the initial malware became active, which was on December 27, 2019, they sent them a message with the question, "What now?" The attackers responded that they demanded 30 bitcoins before they would release the decryption key. The university sent a small account of 1 bitcoin to test if it indeed reached the hacker, and it did. They confirmed that they had received the payment. And after this, the university decided to pay up the full amount of 30 bitcoins, almost 200,000 euros, to get the decryption key. Now this, of course, is a real public debate in the Netherlands, because those 200,000 euros is public money. And it also makes sure that these attackers were successful, that there's an incentive for them to do this attack to another victim and support their methods. However, it was a really hard choice for the university. It would taken them months to get back into their systems, and they found that paying the money would be worth the while. And we'd be interested to understand what your opinion about this is, so leave that behind in the comments. The impact of the whole malware situation was that the university was down for a total of 6 weeks. 267 Windows servers were compromised. Again, a large amount of public money was used to pay ransom and get the decryption key, but also it is assumed that the attackers extracted data from the university's crown jewel, Maastricht Studie, and although it's not been proven, there is a chance that that data could be abused. The university had no recovery plan, no offline backups, so getting fully back and the final repairs will probably take weeks, if not months, to complete. Now the question, of course, is who was behind these attacks? How can we attribute this to a certain group, a certain people, or even a nation state? And that's always a hard thing. But if you look at this specific attack, you see that the mode of operation looks a lot like that of TA505. This is a group that's known as Do Dare or Grace Rat and named after one of their tools. They were active since 2014, made about 150 victims in 2019, and it's believed that they reside in East Europe and that they are Russian-speaking cyber criminals. Now, earlier in the presentation, we saw that there were a lot of attack stages and a lot of attack methods that are being used. And something that's really interesting to look at is the MITRE attack framework. This MITRE attack framework is a non-profit open framework that anybody can use that tries to categorize and provide more information about these attack vectors. These are the techniques, tactics and procedures that were used in this attack. We found privilege escalation, we found discovery execution, defense evasion, credential access, lateral movement, for instance by using pass the hash. And if we map that back to all the stages that this Do Dare or TA505 group has been using, we see that they typically start with spear phishing and email attachments that execute malicious child processes. We see malicious macros then giving birth to remote access Trojans. Specific items like scheduled tasks, setting up command and control channels, and then executing PowerSploit, Cobalt Strike to get the right set of credentials, discover the network, and move laterally and perhaps stage the malware before the attack begins. And in the right-hand column, you see again how the Microsoft solution world could have helped with Exchange Online Protection, part of ATP, with safe links, but also Windows Defender as part of Windows 10 or Linux or Mac nowadays. The EDR solution, so Defender ATP. We also could have a look at firewalls on workstations, attack surface reduction rules, and again things like privileged identity management for high credential and high privilege accounts. Now, want to know more about TA505? Go have a look at Defender ATP, look on Do There, and you get an executive summary and way more details on this attack group. Now, we've seen in this case that there are a lot of signals. We get signals from Defender ATP, from antivirus, from Azure ATP perhaps, and all sorts of other properties. Now, Microsoft introduced last year Azure Sentinel, which is a cloud-native SIEM. And Azure Sentinel helps you to combine all of these signals into single use cases. Azure Sentinel is a service that runs in Azure. It has limitless cloud speed and scale. It has AI built in, so machine learning models. Easy integration for things like Microsoft services, but also network and others. And you only pay for what you use for the storage that you put into the log analytics workspace. Now, because it lives in Azure, it's not bound to Microsoft only. Security is much broader than that. You can connect AWS properties. You could source your network events from Palo Alto, Cisco, or the others, but also connect modern things like Azure Kubernetes. If you deploy Azure Security Center and set up protection for Azure Kubernetes, then these events also flow back into Azure Sentinel as part of a use case. Now, these use cases is a sample where we combine multiple signals. So Azure Sentinel gets a signal from, let's say, Azure AD Identity Protection. At 9:13, an unusual login was done from Kazakhstan, which by itself might not mean that much yet. A second signal was received, let's say, from the network where we found an anonymous IP, let's say a Tor exit. And then a third signal was received from Defender ATP 3 minutes after, where a suspicious PowerShell script was executed. And then let's say the final signal we get from Cloud App Security, where a minute later we find an inbox forwarding rule that all the email for this user is now being forwarded to a Gmail address, which then raises the question of, is this a possible data exfiltration? And your SOC or MDR should probably alert you on this. This is an example of how that looks like, a compromised account leading to mailbox exfiltration with all the details of the user, the target mailbox, and the alerts that combined into one signal. Now, we already talked about the fact that there are a multitude of signals, and if you look at how Microsoft solves this, then there's something called Azure Sentinel Fusion. That's the machine learning capability that Azure Sentinel has. Microsoft itself has big properties. They get lots of signals from network, from identities, from mailbox, from endpoints. Then they use probabilistic kill chain graphs to narrow them down, and then machine learning based on priority scoring to really narrow them down to high fidelity incidents that you can then follow up on. A sample that you get out of the box is the advanced multi-stage attack detection that then looks at persistence, lateral movement, exfiltration, command and control, and does it, for instance, by sourcing events from Azure AD Identity Protection and Cloud App Security. Now you get a high fidelity signal, then the next stop probably is to start hunting, get more information for this event, for this incident, understand the context, how it happened, and dig a bit deeper, if you will, so advanced hunting. Now, advanced hunting is built into Azure Sentinel. There's this graphical UI you can use to see all the signals that led up to this incident with all the information and the connecting lines. Information, for instance, about Cobalt Strike appearing in your network, and then narrowing down the timeline to understand suspicious PowerShell activities, script that get uploaded, user and IP reconnaissance, and again, like the University of Maastricht, paint a bigger picture on how this then came to life. And with Azure Sentinel, you can use your existing data. You could source in Windows event, you could source in Sysmon or some of your network traffic. But one of the things I want to highlight, I guess, is the better together story. And what you get is that Office ATP, Cloud App Security, Defender ATP, Azure Security Center, Azure ATP, etc. are then combined as part of the kill chain. So we look at applications, devices, identities and data, understand the various steps taken, and they then are brought as signals into Azure Sentinel and then give you a picture about what's happening in your environment. Now, I represent Wortell Enterprise Security, and we are an organization that deploys a 24/7 managed detection and response. It is a cloud-native SOC that is certified for ISO, NEN, ISA. We are enterprise ready. We have clients from the hundreds into the thousands of workstations and employees. And we have something we call a use case library that already has a lot of the detections for these typical use cases and these things happening potentially in your network. And we provide them to you through a software platform we call Vidara. That's an in-house built neural network for Azure Sentinel that's built by the same people that have built the free AZ Sentinel PowerShell module where you can automate your Sentinel instance. This is how we get a multi-customer SOC. It also has automatic classification of alerts and incidents. So we apply a machine learning model to give you the MITRE attack TTP and understand more about the phase in which this attack vector or incident is happening. But we also have a honey network for Azure Sentinel that then gives you honeypots in your network and also outside your network that simulates certain software, grabs users, grabs IP addresses, grabs queries and understands what the hacker is trying to do. And then brings it into Azure Sentinel where you get a layer on top and understand more about the use case that's happening. If you want to try it yourself, there's a 2-month trial. Try it out. It's Microsoft funded if you apply for it. It ends after 60 days if you're not satisfied, and you get to experience a cloud native SOC with Azure Sentinel, Defender ATP and all of the other goodness that you saw in this video. Well, thank you for watching and see you soon in another video.